Not at all. Lots of questions this morning about the migration numbers. The Office for National Statistics coming under fire for misrepresenting the numbers from last year, getting it wrong to the tune of about, a couple of 100,000. It turns out that the number last year should have been 906,000 instead of what they said it was, which was like 728. But we're told now that the daily hotel bill for housing asylum seekers, according to figures in The Sun, 8.3 million. The average cost of housing one asylum seeker per year, £41,000. £5.4 billion spent on the asylum system in 2023-24, up 36% in a year. You know, the numbers just get worse and worse and worse. I mean, surely at some point or other, somebody's going to stand up and go, we can't afford this anymore.
You'd hope so, wouldn't you? And let's not forget that this is coming at a time when pretty much every section of British society is being kiboshed in some form or another by the Labour government, whether you've got the farmers, the pensioners or the employers of this nation. We're all having to suffer through Labour's plans in some form or another. So the fact that we're seeing now that about £5.4 billion every single year is being spent on those that are broken into our country is an incredibly insulting thing to have to get to grips with. I think the biggest news that came out yesterday was obviously the legal net migration figures. I think to have seen an upward revision of nearly 200,000, which the ONS seem to have just lost down the back of the couch, is quite a astounding state of affairs that we now have a national statistics body that is unable to actually deal with national statistics. We simply don't know who is in our country, how many people are in our country, and how many people are leaving our country. And there are calls now, and I think they're very, very important voices that need to be listened to on this, that we almost need to be moving towards an emergency census to actually get to grips with the scale of mass migration that took place under the Conservatives.
Right. But would the census even pick up all the people that are here? Because, I mean, presumably the problem with doing a census would be that you wouldn't actually catch all of the casual, numbers of people who are wandering around in a state of seeking asylum while either living in temporary accommodation or living in a hotel. They wouldn't necessarily be counted because they wouldn't know where to go to be counted.
Well, on illegal migration, that's definitely a very good point. And of course, there are many that have actually had their asylum application rejected and been told that they aren't allowed to stay in the United Kingdom. They then just disappear into the ether. They disappear into the black market and end up making a living on car washes and Deliveroos and things like that.
And that's the sort of upwardly mobile section of that market, isn't it? The downwardly mobile section of that market is working in prostitution, working in drug dealing, working in criminal gangs.
Yeah, and there's a whole host of social problems that quite clearly come along with that. And I think that many communities, unfortunately, across the north of England in particular, are rediscovering the problems that come with having migrant hotels opened in their neck of the woods as well. Let's not forget that one of the key promises the Labour Party made during the general election was that they would end the huge sums that we are spending on hotels every single year. These figures obviously show that there's a long way to go to bring down that bill, and the fact that they are now reopening hotels in places like Altrincham, in places like Crewe, there is a real recognition, I think, across the country that a lot of the promises that we were actually having to listen to during the general election aren't going to be delivered on.
Right, exactly right. And let's talk a bit about, as well, Keir Starmer's statement yesterday, because we've got a clip to show you where he talks about a white paper plan, where he's going to be sort of trying to discover exactly what people are doing when they come here. Have a look at this.
We will publish a white paper imminently, which sets out a plan to reduce immigration. The Migration Advisory Committee is already conducting a review. And where we find clear evidence of sectors that are over-reliant on immigration, we will reform the points-based system and make sure that applications for the relevant visa routes, whether it's the skilled worker route or the shortage occupation list, will now come with new expectations on training people here in our country. We will also crack down on any abuse of the visa routes. For far too long, we've been casual about malpractice in our labour market, which sends a clear signal overseas that we're a soft touch. Well, no more.
Well, he says no more, but I mean, he says things like that all the time. But what in actual fact is he going to do? You know, this white paper is not going to suddenly magically make all these people disappear. I mean, I get asked the question all the time, what's going to happen to these people in hotels when they get moved out of the hotels? They're going to be given free housing, aren't they?
Yeah, I'll believe it when I see it in terms of Keir Starmer's promise that he'll be bringing this to an end. Of course, what does normally happen with those that are in hotels that eventually get moved on is that they end up being put on some of the poorest councils and local authorities around the country, and they are then required to put these people up in social housing. I think he's, again, going down the Keir Starmer route of making incredibly big promises that he has no real intention, no real plan on how to deliver. And you look at some of the people that you see on Labour front benches, and particularly Labour back benches, and you have to think that any measure that this Prime Minister tries to introduce that would actually tackle the illegal migration problem and tackle those that are in our country illegally doesn't stand a real chance of actually looking up to scrutiny, because these are people that are, by their very nature, by their very DNA, open bore enthusiasts, and they would absolutely irk away from any measure that they would perhaps deem to be somewhat nasty.
Exactly right, because at the end of the day we still have a country full of the sort of elites who believe that immigration's great. You know, it's fantastic, we need it, we must have it. There are certain, you know, industries that would only die if we didn't have immigration, people to come in and work in it. I mean, we hear it all the time. The NHS would not survive without you know, immigration. Well, sorry, the NHS is pretty useless, quite frankly, and whether or not the people who come here from other countries to work in it save it from being even more useless is kind of a moot point. It's useless. So whatever it is that they're doing isn't really making any difference anyway, is it?
Well, it's a lie that we need mass migration to keep a prop the NHS. We have the wherewithal in our own nation with our own people right now to make the health service fully staffed, and you know, it's ultimately the problems with the NHS obviously lie in the need for fundamental reform in the way things work. But every single year we have thousands and thousands of Brits applying for medical courses, applying for courses in nursing, applying for health and social care courses, and to try and develop those skills that would allow them to enter those sectors that were apparently chronically understaffed in, and they're turned away because we simply haven't put in place for the last 10, 20 years the means through which to train these individuals, and we've capped places such as those to train doctors at universities and instead allowed our universities to offer places to those from overseas. So a real reformatting of how we actually approach the link up between training and our job market is needed if we are to break this addiction. And I think the white paper that he's promised will probably have some very waffly language. I can't imagine it will effectively set a cap on those that are coming into the country, which is ultimately what we really, really need if we are to therefore shift our economy away from mass migration. You have to set a hard limit and say we will not breach this this upper threshold. But without that, the numbers will just keep drifting higher.
Yeah, exactly right. And finally, what about this deal that the Home Secretary has hatched with Iraq? Apparently £800,000 of taxpayers' money is going to be given to the Iraqi government in a bid to crack down on Iraq sending so many people here. But frankly, the people who are coming here from Iraq are not coming here because the government is sending them. They're coming here because they're trying to get away from the government. So why is giving the government money going to make any difference?
They're coming here because we're a soft touch, and unless you address the pull factors that makes those people want to come to the UK, you can give as much money as you want to these governments around the world. You can give it to them in the Middle East or in Eastern Europe and pray and hope that somehow they'll find benevolence and help us deal with our own problem of people breaking into our country. But the fact of the matter is that the only way to actually stop those crossing the channel is to send a very hard message that if you come into the UK illegally, you will be deported. And until the Labour Party realises that, the numbers are just going to keep going up and up.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Robert Bates, thank you very much.